name is Margaret Lundberg, and I'm here today to present my research project, which asks a question inspired by Mikhail Bakhtin. How does a diarist create identity through the language of her diary text and in response to an audience, whether real or imagined? And in other words, what difference does her community make? So I'm looking today at three facets of community reflected in my project: joining in community or becoming an author's responding audience, building that community on things held in common, and finally, sharing that community with others. Books, journals, reading, writing, all illustrate the creation of community between an author and a reader. The moment you pick up a book, becoming part of its audience, sharing things held in common, you are committing yourself for however brief a time to joining in community with the author. As a writer, you're working to create a sense of community with your readers. You introduce them to your friends, the characters who populate the world that you're creating, the history they share, the things that concern them. You're also using all of these things to draw in your readers, to build a bridge that they can cross, a way to communicate with them. You're enabling them to discover the community that you're creating and to begin to imagine themselves living within it. But the reader plays part in the creation of community as well. She brings her own history and the history of other communities that she's joined, and views the community of the author through those of her past. Together, author and reader create a community of their own. But just moving into a neighborhood doesn't make you a member of a community, and simply picking up a book doesn't form a community between author and reader either. It's the discovery of things held in common that move author and reader toward building a community. As the culminating project of my master's studies, I'm writing a book, a work of fiction that characterizes this creation of community between a 19th century diarist and a modern-day woman who discovers her diary. Although my book is fiction, it's based on the very real 30-year diary of an Iowa farm wife, Emily Holly Gillespie. She begins her diary as a romantic and idealistic 20-year-old and ends it with her death at age 50, a woman who is deeply disappointed with her life. My protagonist, Lizzie, is a not-so-happily married high school lit teacher who writes historical romance novels, but really wants to write something real. She travels to Iowa after inheriting an old family farmhouse and discovers this diary in the attic. As she reads the diary, she begins a journey in which she moves from curious observer. She's looking at Emily's life from the outside. She notices the things that they have in common, and she starts writing about those things within a diary of her own. Then she begins to imagine herself as the diary's heroine through her own writing. She enters the text, she examines Emily's world from the inside. She begins to wonder what, if anything, might have been written between the lines. Lizzie then becomes a responding audience, asking questions. What if Emily had made different choices in her life? Was this truly her reality, or had she reinvented herself in some way? She begins to search for the historical woman behind the text. And finally, Lizzie begins to hold imagined conversations with this diarist, working through the issues of her own life as she proceeds to share Emily's story. In this way, they truly become a community of two, demonstrating what happens every time a curious soul picks up a book. So as both reader and author, and an instrument of both through this work of fiction, I'd like to share just a little bit of the story that the three of us, Emily, Lizzie, and I, are creating together. So in this bit I'm going to read is the moment when Lizzie sort of comes to understand what she's doing. Leaning back into the chair, my thoughts still entangled in Emily's tale like half-tied threads she'd been weaving in the pages of her diary, I had an epiphany. My editor was clamoring for another book, but so far I had nothing to offer, not the slightest hint of a story. But I could let Emily's story become my own. I could give her a voice. She clearly wanted so much to become a writer, but her words never went farther than those scrawled across these pages. Yet I had an audience waiting for her. I could deliver her story to the world. Closing my eyes to the distractions around me and taking a deep breath, I again allowed her voice to fill my ears. My mind's eye could see the images she'd crafted, the plot she'd so carefully laid out, her burning desire to be remembered. Listening deeply, I could almost hear her clearing her throat to begin. I smiled, opened my eyes to put pen to paper. Okay, Emmy, let's tell your story. So, thank you.